Hello everyone, welcome to another access control coaching session. My name is Cole Nebaker. I'm the training and event manager here at PDK. And in this session we are going to be talking about fire code and access control. So the reason we're covering fire code is because it's one of the most important pieces of your access control system. PDK's motto is to protect life and property. But we wouldn't very well be protecting life if we do not allow for free egress and cover some of the more important parts of releasing doors when there is a fire. So that is what we are going to cover today is fire code. One more thing I want to cover before we dive into it is that this varies a lot dependent on the state that you are in. So I'm going to be giving some pretty generic fire code advice. But I want to emphasize that this fire code discussion is really just to get your mind going on what is entailed by meeting fire code. My recommendation would be to read up on your county, city, state fire code and reach out to a fire marshal as necessary to ensure that all of your installations meet fire code. So be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, as well as leave comments as we go, comments and questions. We have about a 30-second delay, so if you are typing out your questions in real time, it's going to take me about 30 seconds to get around to them. So the earlier you get to asking your questions, the better. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So I want to cover a few definitions first. When I say free egress, what I mean by that is a safe, unobstructed path allowing occupants to exit. It's kind of a fancy word for exit. You know, when you look in a building and you see those exit signs, those are indicating that there is free egress in that general direction. So you want to have free egress to allow people to swiftly and quickly move. And what that could look like is, from an access control standpoint, making sure that the doors unlock in the case of an emergency, or perhaps it's the way you position the doors. You typically want doors to swing outwards from where all of the traffic is trying to exit the building so that people don't pile up and crush against the door. Many hard lessons in history have been learned that way. Now, we also have fail-safe versus fail-secure. And this is just a difference in how the lock operates. So typically when we're talking about these, we're talking about mag locks and strikes. So a fail-safe device is something that unlocks doors automatically when power is lost. And that would be your prime mag lock example. Mag locks require constant power to energize the electromagnets inside of it. And once there is no longer power being provided to it, that power is lost, thereby unlocking the door. There's nothing magnetically charging the door to keep it closed anymore. The exact opposite of this is going to be fail secure, where locks remain secured even when power is lost. It sounds more unsafe in the case of a fire, and it can be in that regard. But fail-secure devices such as strikes typically have some sort of physical egress or physical way to bypass the door. That could look like a door handle, a lever, a crash bar, something that allows people to still bypass the locking mechanism from the inside of the building and get out in the case that there is an emergency. Now, one of the resources you can use when referencing fire code for access control will be the NFPA, and the NFPA stands for the National Fire Protection Association. Now, I literally just copied and pasted the code, not the codes, the code for fire and access control directly from the NFPA's website, and that's what you see here. Now, you'll notice it's not super intuitive here, so I've kind of translated it into basic English, all right? So the first point, when a sensor is provided on the egress side and arranged to detect an occupant approaching the doors, and the doors are arranged to unlock upon detection of an approaching occupant, activation of the building fire protection or loss of power to the sensor. It's worded kind of strange, so I've translated that. So the first point is doors are arranged to unlock when there is either an approaching occupant the fire protection system activates or power is lost. Very important there. The second one, when a loss of power to that part of the access control system that locks the doors automatically unlocks the doors. Or in other words, when power is lost, the doors must unlock. The next one, the third one. When the doors are arranged to unlock from a manual release device, in other words, a push to exit REX, it must be located 40 to 48 inches vertically above the floor and within 5 feet of the secured door. So you've probably seen some of these REXs. They're typically green and put to the side of the door. Those are manual forms of release, and they must be located within this specification of the door. The fourth point, when activation of the building fire protective signaling system, if provided, automatically unlocks the doors. Or in other words, when fire protection system is activated, the doors must automatically unlock. And then very similar to that, when the sprinkler or fire access or fire alarm control panel activates, the doors must automatically unlock. Those last two are very similar to each other. So kind of what you're seeing here is a general trend of the doors must unlock, and typically that is done by cutting power to the locking mechanism itself. And we can do this in a couple of different ways. So most commonly, you are going to tie it into the FACP or the fire alarm control panel, or maybe you have a secondary kind of device that activates the relay, thereby cutting power, both of which I'm going to cover when we get to the diagrams portion of this. Now, the way we can do this, one of the ways we can do this, is by tying a fire panel directly into the power supply that is controlling the locks for the access control system. So an example of this would be what PDK uses, an Altronics eFlow 102NB. And that is a 12 volt, 10 amp power supply that we supply with our Red 8s and Red Maxes. And perhaps maybe you even use this outside of PDK's applications. But a lot of power supplies have this functionality. Now, as you can see on the right, I've included a diagram that's included with the documentation for this power supply, and it labels a couple of points and what they do on the board. And you'll notice kind of at the bottom of that board, you see a 1C, 1D, 1E, and 1F. That entire block right there is going to be a tie-in where, dependent on how you tie it in, will tie to the fire control panel and cut power in the case that there is a fire. That makes it pretty straightforward. From there, mag locks lose power, unlocking the doors, and strikes lose power, meaning that you can use physical egress to still bypass them altogether. For our hardware, once again, to recap, we have mag locks, we have strikes. So the mag locks require constant power to remain locked. So they need to have the power cut in the case of an emergency to lose power. And I think this is where a lot of people get held up too. Mag locks, by definition, since they're fail-safe, they sound safer, and I think that's kind of deceiving. Mag locks can be very dangerous because, unlike strikes, they don't have a physical form of egress that bypasses the mag lock altogether. You have to have something that cuts the power. And if you, as the installer, do not include appropriate forms of egress on that mag lock, they could become death traps very easily. So dependent on your state, you're going to have multiple forms of egress on a mag lock, multiple forms of bypassing the mag lock altogether. And what that typically looks like is tying it in directly in line with the power. So you would have, the most common scenario I can think of is going to be one motion REX and one push to exit REX. Both of those must be tied in to the power line for the mag lock in order to adhere to fire code in lots of states. Some states just require one direct form of egress, and then one software form of egress is allowable. Now, what I'm going to post in the chat here is a link to multiple common REX configurations. There's far too many to cover in this single presentation, and so I've linked a link to our knowledge base, which has a couple of common REX release scenarios tied in with both strikes and mag locks. So just make sure that you have multiple forms of egress. It's never harmful to have more forms of egress rather than not enough, because if one fails, you will want to have that secondary form of egress. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too long about those mag locks, but I want to emphasize the absolute importance of having multiple forms of bypassing that mag lock. Now strikes, a little more straightforward. You can have a Rex on a strike, and that's perfectly fine, but probably the more common solution you're going to have is some sort of mechanical form of egress. So you've probably seen a million of these. You have some sort of crash bar where when pushed it allows you to bypass the strike altogether, never actually electronically opening the strike, just completely physically bypassing that mechanism altogether and going out. Now you can still have Rexes on strike devices. And maybe a situation where you would want that is if you want to be notified if there is a door forced alert. In other words, there was a door opened without either a reader input or a Rex input being detected. So you can use a Rex device, or you can just use your mechanical lever, knob, crash bar, whatever you're going to use. So mag locks are fail safe, strikes are fail secure. Now let's get into some of the wiring for these. Here's an example of what you might do if you are tying in a strike or a mag lock and powering it off of the PDK board. So the PDK board outputs 12 volts, meaning that the strike and mag lock in this example would be a 12-volt device. You can see a constant positive is being provided to the strike. You could do this the exact opposite way and provide a constant negative to the strike or mag lock. But the other end is tied into the relay, where you can see with the jumper up top, it is being negatively charged. Now what we're doing to conform to fire code is taking the negative, and again you could do the exact opposite, take the positive, and we're tying it into the FACP, the fire alarm control panel, listed there on the right. And we are using one of the relays in that panel to cut the power in the case of a fire. So when a fire alarm is detected, it immediately flips that relay, and power is cut off to both the strike and the mag lock. And then from there, the mag lock, the door just unlocks. The strike, at that point, you would use a physical form of egress to bypass it altogether. Now, another example of what you could do, based off of that Altronics diagram that I showed you in the previous slide, is if you're using a third-party power supply, such as that eFlow 102NB, is you can just tie into the fire relay on the bottom of that board. So you can see here we have no jumper on the PDK board, and that's because we are just controlling the negative with our board. We're not actually providing any power through our board. So the positive for the strike or the mag is coming from the Altronics board, and that's unobstructed. However, the negative is running into our relay to be controlled, but there is also two lines coming from the FACP down into the fire relay to cut power to that entire Altronics board in the case that there is an emergency. And the interesting thing with that is not only will it cut the primary power, it will also cut the backup battery power that would be potentially tied into that Altronics as well. And that would not be the case inherently with the previous diagram. If you have a battery on that one, the backup battery might then kick in and try to keep things operational. So it just depends on the fire codes for the city, county, or state that you live in. And again, this is general advice. I can't say that this is going to be applicable everywhere, but hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking to accomplish with our fire panel integration. So that is it. I know it's short and sweet, but that's really the general nature of it. We are just trying to cut power in the case of an emergency and make sure that all of the locking mechanisms have some form of release when that power is lost. That's why it's important to know the difference between a fail-secure versus a fail-secure versus a fail-safe device. is because they both operate differently and they will need different mechanisms included, maybe in line with their power, or maybe a physical mechanism to allow us to bypass it in the case of an emergency. Now, I haven't seen any questions come through, and I'm sure that's because all of you are still scrambling to kind of put together the speed at which I just went through that, and I know that it's a very short session. But if you do have any questions, be sure to leave them now, again, because of that 30-second delay. Once again, I really just want to emphasize how important this is. From my time in support, I remember a couple of scenarios where somebody called us kind of in a frenzy, actually, and would say, hey, I've brought this system online and it's been working for a couple of months, but I just had a fire inspection and I failed, and they said I need to have it done in the next 24 hours correctly. And so they're freaking out. And what they had done is they had tied a mag lock directly into the PDK system and tied a motion Rex and a push button Rex into the B and negative of our board. Now, on its own, that is not acceptable. You can't have strictly a software release for a Rex. That is extremely dangerous. You need to have some sort of direct disconnect built in line with the power. Now, what is okay is having direct disconnects for your Rexes tied in line with the power and reporting based off of one leg, pulling one leg off of that Rex and reporting on it in the B and negative. That's fine. But the main mechanism itself has to actually be a direct disconnect, where the secondary piece to that is taking an additional leg off that same Rex and using it for reporting purposes. So never simply install a mag lock and use the B and negative for the sole release of that. That is not safe. And that will almost certainly cause you to fail fire inspection. So I guess that's kind of my little rant there. I haven't seen any other questions come through. So appreciate you guys joining. We do these once a month on the first Tuesday of every month, and we do it based off of your feedback. So if you have any topics you would like to see covered, leave them in the comments, reach out to us, reach out to our sales team, and we would be happy to cover those. Otherwise, we will plan on catching you next month. Thanks for joining.